you to tell us your name and share anything with us that you're comfortable sharing about you so that we can have a conversation. So please, can you tell us your name?
Sure. My name is Sara Sun Beale. And let's see. I was born and brought up in Toledo, Ohio. This is a diversity chat. So what was that like? Lily white, kind of middle-class neighborhood. And I had the good fortune of having a number of opportunities to get to know people of color once I got into high school. So there was one Black person in our high school. He was our Latin teacher. Wow. And he became a very good friend of ours. In fact, just emailing again this week, he's in his 80s now, and we visit him in Washington, and we're going to schedule a Zoom meeting. He told us that he was hired on the phone, and he was sure that it never occurred to the people who hired him that a Black man might be a Latin teacher and have the record that he had and so forth. So he arrived, and he was a wonderful teacher and a charismatic person. The Latin club became the biggest club in the school. He was friends with all of the teachers. If you were going to meet one person who would, you would love, he became Duncan's roommate when my husband's roommate when he went back to graduate school and so forth. What a wonderful first person of color to meet. And then my church, I was trying to remember, I think it must have been either the summer before my senior year in high school or before my freshman year in college. They gave me a mammoth $400 summer stipend, wow. $40 a week for 10 weeks wow. to work in a community center in what I believe we euphemistically called a transitional neighborhood in Toledo, which at that point was almost all Black. And I was the only person in the whole community center that didn't have an afro, as I like to say, and pretty much everybody we interacted with. And those lovely people took me when we went on a field trip to Cleveland. They just took me along. They never said a word. We went into churches where they had the Black Jesus on the cross, and where they were explaining that they were training the green cross, not the red cross, because everybody knew when Armageddon started, Whitey was not going to come in with the red cross, right? And they just took me right along, and my eyes were like that. And they showed the street, like if the Italian people came across here, the Black people would probably kill them. And if the Black people went over there, the Italian people would probably kill them. It was after the Huff riots and so forth, that time of high racial tension. And they just took me along. And so wonderful education from that point of view in seeing the world through someone else's eyes, mm-hmm. right? And seeing what the people in that neighborhood were going through, and how the savvy people running that center were trying to be of service while not be taken advantage of. I remember Betty, the director of our community program, we had a soda machine. And she always told all the kids and everyone that if they lost any money, just to give her a note. When the repair people came, she would try to get their money back. She could open it up, but she didn't want them to have any idea that there was any money in, so it was just so interesting seeing how she handled herself and sort of negotiated things. I guess the next summer, I worked for the Postal Service as a mail carrier. Which was a great job because it paid more than almost anything, right, that you could possibly do with no skills. And I was all over the city. I also drove a 1-ton truck through downtown at rush hour, which was interesting because I'd never driven anything other than my mother's Mustang. Mm-hmm. And I'd had 3 learner's permits 3 summers in a row because I was afraid to take the test. And so I went in to take the driving test on the truck. I was terrified. And I said to this old crusty guy, do people normally take this test? And he said, yeah, they do if they're not nervous. Right? So that was an interesting, those 2 experiences, being in different parts of the city that you'd never been in, getting to know people who had grown up in or worked in those neighborhoods. The other mail carriers, because I would be assigned to a different route every day just to fill in for people. And they would tell you, please don't rush around. You're going too fast. You'll make us look bad. You know, you don't know what it's like on days when we have to deliver everyone's utility bills and, you know, Christmas and all that. And they time these routes and you can't be coming in early. And just, you know, just understanding what different people's lives were like, and seeing if you had anything that people had to sign for, you had to go in to the apartment buildings or into the house and so forth. So I got a kind of education despite the limited circumstances of my own neighborhood and school. And then it was limited in another way because we didn't know any women that had ever done anything, right? And of course they did things. That sounds terrible, but they didn't have jobs outside the home, and they didn't have aspirations to do that. So I was a law student at Michigan, and my class was the first class that had 10% women. That was like a big deal. They were shocked. There was a big faculty which had a total of 0 women. Zero women. And I actually had a faculty member say to me, oh, we never really had a woman that did well before. It was like Dr. Johnson's talking dog. And as a result, I think partly, I mean, I did well. That of course was important to having later opportunities. But as a result of basically being brought up to be polite and nice to people and being a friendly person, I got to know quite a few people. And a student in the class ahead of me, I later learned, was very helpful in my getting a clerkship. And when I saw all the applications that came in the next year, I said to the judge's assistant, I don't know how I ever got this job. And she said, Ron Gould kept saying, I think you should hire Sara Beale. Sara Beale would be good, right? And so I kind of had a hand up to get this dream job with the one federal appellate judge within driving distance of Ann Arbor, where my husband was still in graduate school, and the second African-American judge confirmed to the U.S. Court of Appeals, the first African-American judge ever elected to a trial court in the state. Again, somebody who, and his family, his staff, gave me lots to think about of things that I never had any idea of. His judicial assistant was talking about how when they went to the prom and so forth, you would have to go to the back of a restaurant and get takeout, right? You wouldn't be allowed to go in. Judge McCree would tell us stories. He was a Harvard Law grad, and he had applied for, I don't know if it was a summer position or a permanent position. And he came over Christmas vacation and he presented himself at the law firm, and they didn't believe that it was him. So it was like my high school teacher, because they just had never imagined. And so he showed them the letter, and they accused him of having stolen it.
Wow. Wow.
So seeing how he handled himself and hearing these stories, even though, in my own life, I didn't have a lot of peers initially that were dealing with these things, I got some very helpful early exposure to it. And I later had the opportunity to work again for Judge McCree when he was Solicitor General of the United States. So he stepped down from the court, and it looked like he was going to follow Thurgood Marshall's experience. Thurgood Marshall had been Solicitor General, and then, had been on the Court of Appeals, stepped down to become Solicitor General, and then was elevated to the Supreme Court. President Carter never got a position on the court, and Justice Marshall didn't leave. So to the extent that it was thought that it was that seat, as opposed to some other, whatever other seat might come, I think that they had thought that Marshall was getting pretty old and would be pleased to sort of hand off to Judge McCree in another Democratic administration, and so forth, someone that he would like to have his legacy. That was clearly not the case, right? But I did, Judge McCree was very much a really wonderful mentor. And he told me once that he thought he deserved he was kidding, of course, that he deserved about 10% of my lifetime earnings because he spent so much time giving me advice and recommending me for things. But it was just it was quite a job for him. And that was certainly true because I was very, very naive, very unsure about what I wanted to do. And so it was so helpful to have a number of different classmates, sort of suggested that I apply for things or helped put my resume forward or and so forth. And then Judge McCree was phenomenal, and he never saw our second son, and I was always so sad about that. He died very young. He died in his 60s, and I always thought he would be there. And I thought I guess now it's, given his age, it's completely unbelievable to imagine that he would still be alive, but he's the person I would want to talk to about what's going on right now in our country, right? That with his perspective and his generosity of spirit and wisdom, but still, having been the victim over and over again of people's assumptions and discrimination and so forth. He's the person I would want our students to hear from. He's a person, again, that I would want to continue to keep learning from.
Yeah. And
wow, that went on longer than I thought it should. Sorry about that.
All right. No worries whatsoever. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you teach criminal law, is that correct?
That is correct.
So the question from the Black person's seat is, why are there so many Black and brown men incarcerated considering our numbers in the population?
Well, so I don't think there's a single answer, although a lot of the answers come together and they're different outcomes of prejudice, discrimination, lack of economic opportunity. So you could point to a lot of government policies that are that play an important role. So all of the current protests about police tactics are correct in terms of the fact that if someone is confronted by a police officer, how they will be treated, I am 100% sure, are different if it's a young Black man as opposed to me. So age, gender, but race for sure. So I have often told a story about having gotten to the airport and changed purses and briefcases, and I didn't have my wallet. I didn't have any money, I didn't have any ID, and it was too late to go back home. So all the security people kind of consulted, and they decided if they searched everything that they could let me on the plane. And then one of my former students came up. Oh, and then I realized I wouldn't be able to get from the airport in Washington into the city. So one of the gate agents loaned me $20.
Wow.
Right? You can just, I got home from that trip. Everybody kept loaning me money and stuff. I got home with money, right? So I got taken out to, dinner by a student, former student. And I don't think that would have happened to other people. I scare my students in some way, but I don't, in a public setting, I don't scare anyone, right? So all of those things go into how people are confronted, but why are they being confronted? So if you peel it back more, why are some neighborhoods subject to such a heavy police presence, right? So they're more likely to be the subject of a traffic stop, or they're more likely to be stopped if they're congregating on a corner. And all of those policies have at least partially rooted in race and socioeconomic class and so forth. And why are very few children of wealthy middle class or upper class white people convicted of selling cocaine, right, or whatever? They have other opportunities, and their parents are going to be right. And why do they have other opportunities, and so forth? So what's the police strategy of policing in certain neighborhoods? How do people get, are they more likely to be stopped if the police officer sees a traffic light is out or sees them doing a rolling stop, right? Are they more likely to be hassled by the police or arrested if they're a person of color? are they more likely actually to be involved in some kinds of transactions than they would be if they had a lot of other opportunities, right? Better educational opportunities, more job opportunities, their families having the resources, if they see them getting into trouble, to do more things for them. So I think that's a big set of factors. Then there are all the sentencing laws and the how do we define a crime? How do we punish it? How do we determine how those are applied in individual cases? Why did we treat crack cocaine different from powder cocaine, right? And it was a policy decision by Congress, and it was driven, in my opinion, at least in part, by their image of who the crack defendants were and the crack scourge. And it had a heavy overlay of race, right? And so there's just so many different factors that come together and are pushing us towards that result. I think also there's a kind of an American reaction, which is very different from a European reaction, which is to solve a problem, we're more likely to want to use punitive sanctions than to do something regulatory or social services. So our approach to drug problems is much more punitive than it is in many European countries, right? We'd rather spend money putting people in jail than to have more programs for young people in their high schools, right? And so forth. And there's a famous book by Guido Calabresi, which I actually have never read. I certainly haven't written it, have never read, but as I understand the idea about tragic choices, we're more willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get a child out of a well than to do the various kinds of prophylactic work to make things safer, right? We just tend to want to respond one-off, and in the criminal justice area, we tend to want to say that person did a bad thing, not that we have created a system where a lot of people, whether they are in neighborhoods where they are surrounded by violence and social disorder, and the teachers aren't very good and the classrooms are overcrowded, right, and so forth, or whether they have a learning disability and they can't do well in school, all the reasons that kids may get off the rails, right, all of which we could work on. Or would we rather say the people who are subject to those situations and those conditions, some percentage of which then engage in various kinds of what we would define as criminal behavior. We rather than trying to prevent that for most cases, I think our policy has been to punish the people who in fairly predictable numbers fail, right, and engage in those kinds of behaviors. And that's just, that applies across the board, but it seems to be triggered in a much more punitive and aggressive way when legislatures and the public in general thinks of that crime, when they envision that criminal, they think of it as a Black person or a Black man or a Black young man. I think it's both. We don't have a lot of social safety nets, right? And we don't do a lot of protective things. We don't tend to define things as a social problem. We tend to define it as an individual problem. But when we set the penalties and we think about the policies, I think they've been harsher when it's been a problem that in the public mind is identified with Black people. I think the opioid crisis is being dealt with a little bit differently than some of the other drug scares, right? In part because I think it's perceived as a widespread problem, including in a lot of rural places and a lot of, sort of lower class and other white people in New Hampshire and in Nebraska and in, little towns in Ohio and in West Virginia and so forth. And it doesn't evoke that racist response, I think, on the public, whether that is conscious or subconscious. I think some of it has been conscious. Yeah. I think that conservative politicians, I would say Republican politicians, took over the South after the Democrats passed the civil rights legislation. and Nixon and others nakedly went after white voters in the South with tough on crime rhetoric, which really meant, to a significant degree, a sort of racial, there was people called it a dog whistle, right? That people heard it, right? So it wasn't quite acceptable to talk about being racist in the way that, frankly, our president sometimes does now. But similar sort of culture wars clashes and a sort of racist underpinning to some of those policies, I think, and that was at a time when war on crime, harsher sentencing, and so forth was the solution to what was perceived as the problem. There's other stuff going on. I mean, if you think about the 60s, not only was there all the civil rights protests, but there was all the Vietnam War protests and so forth. And this idea of unrest in the streets and so forth had a kind of broader appeal, right, to segments of the American public. But I think in the South and to a lot of conservative voters, I think it was a racial, an appeal to whites on those kinds of racial terms.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that you didn't mention, but I equate crack to meth, because I mean, like, these are people that are either making money or doing this drug, and it has the same effect, so like when crack had its episode, when it was at its highest level of use, the crack addicts were almost zombies because they were doing anything to get that high back again. And when you look at the meth epidemic that we have now, it's almost the exact same thing. The difference is the population is a different skin tone, right? But I think one of the things that I talked with Lawrence Baxter this morning, and I was really shocked. As many conversations as I've had with him, the perspective that he gave me today just really, really shook me to the core, because he talked about being in South Africa during apartheid and then coming to, Britain, England, and then coming to the United States, and his view about this, and he described the bubble, because Black people, we always talk about white privilege, white supremacy, and white power, because you look at almost every structure that is economically successful, it's white, male dominated most times. It's very rare that it's a Black person or a brown person, and every once in a while it's a woman, but for the most part, most structures are white male institutions. And the way he described that to me, it's like if you're in your bubble, you have no awareness of what's happening around you. You have no idea how police shootings are happening, like when you see things on the news where it says some Black person was shot in the back by a police officer, it automatically resonates that, that person must have been doing something wrong. So that's why that happened. It couldn't possibly be that it was a bad police officer or, anything like that. It's absolutely the problem is the person that is Black. But in a lot of ways, I don't no one in my family that I know of has had any legal issues. My husband did one of these talks with me. He told me when he was a young man, he was helping a friend move, and the car he was in looked like another person's car, and he was surrounded by police officers with guns and shotguns and all this stuff. And I mean, he's a young man in his 20s, and he didn't know what to make of that because he had never experienced that. So he was sitting here thinking about it, and as we try to take apart 1619 to now, and then we can't forget the indigenous people, it seems like to me anybody that is not of the right skin tone is at risk for some sort of harm, whether it's police brutality, access to education, access to justice, access to wealth, equity. All of those things are just seems like far things away, because we are seen as something is wrong with us. There's something wrong with us. And it's just not true just for Black people, but for brown people. I don't know if you listen to any of these, but a couple of the Duke Law students, one of them is Indian and the other one is Islamic. And when I heard their stories, it hurt my heart so much to hear how you must feel to be different in a predominantly white, prestigious law school and how you're seen. And I often wonder, how do we undo what has taken this many years to create so that people feel welcome and humanized as opposed to dehumanized?
Well, certainly I have no, I wish I had the magic bullet, the answer to that. I think individual connections change people's minds, right? And so I've already described a couple of the people that I was close to growing up and how important that was to me. In another context, what we saw in our church, so I'm in a very liberal Protestant denomination. And in fact, when Martin Luther King came, he we used to bring in the chair. One of our members had the chair at his house that Martin Luther King had sat in, right? And so it was a church that crossed what had been the color line here, one of the first ones in Durham. Women in the ministry. My minister growing up was a woman in the church. And so then same-sex marriage, transgender, all those things we've been working on. And for a lot of the people in our congregation, my observation is initially, they're still stuck in whatever the assumptions were that they had before. And this happened for me with our transgender ministerial intern. Mm-hmm. I hadn't met transgender people. I didn't know what their problems were. I didn't have in mind who these people were and what their lives were like. Mm-hmm. And when he would preach and talk about this and interacting with him, he's just this wonderful guy. And I think it just changed everybody's mind in the church. And the same thing when we went to our denomination calls it open and affirming, when for sexual orientation and so forth, we went to that policy and we began to have a number of gay couples, and people started to get to know them. We hired a gay minister of Christian Ed. Now we've had 3 gay ministers of Christian Ed in a row, married to same-sex partners with children. Everybody understands how normal that is and how loving these people are and how much they demonstrate their Christian values. To me, what's disappointing is when people are here at Duke together, that this is not happening for them, right? That when they interact.
Right.
And I don't know exactly why that is so, because it seems to happen so well in other contexts, that you just, whatever assumptions and stereotypes you had don't persist when you interact regularly with someone who's in that group or holds that view or whatever it is. So I don't know, and I don't know whether surfacing that more helps. I mean, so I said when I was in law school, it was 10% women, which is about the percentage that we've had of Black students in many classes, for example. Or I think the Asian group may be a little bigger now, but, different groups, smallish and clearly a minority. We had our own lounge. So this little room off the side of the women's bathroom where it had a little refrigerator and a little, like a large dining table or whatever. So you could eat your lunch in there and you didn't have to go into this testosterone laden big lunchroom with all the guys playing, I don't know, ping pong or whatever they were, shoving each other around or something. So we did have our place that we could kind of retreat to. But basically almost all my best friends, not all, but almost all my best friends were guys. And they just treated me really well. And when I went to different jobs in the government, often I was the only woman or one of the only 2 women or whatever. And all my best friends were guys, and they were great. And they treated me really well. And I wondered afterwards how I had gotten so lucky. So the first office I went to, pretty much all our close friends who started at about the same time or were sort of the same level of seniority, all those guys ended up marrying women doctors or lawyers or whatever, of which there weren't that many, right? So they clearly were very open to egalitarian relationships. And So I feel like I got really lucky and was never treated badly in basically in any of those situations. I do remember talking to one of my fellow research assistants, and I said something to him. He said, "Oh yeah, there are a lot of guys here who think you shouldn't be here, that women shouldn't be here." I said, "Oh really? Huh. What do you know? Huh?"
Right.
But the only problem with him was he was a pretty despicable human being. He was married, but he kept trying to basically put the moves on every woman in the class. And he had a line that he tried on everyone, as though we wouldn't talk to each other. And anyhow, it's a terrible line.
Right.
From Wuthering Heights. "Don't you sort of feel like you're Kathy and I'm Heathcliff?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, not at all. You're dreaming, right? But his, his skewed view. There were people like that, but yeah. So it seems to me that within an institution, it ought to be the person to person, getting to know faculty members and realizing they support you, talking to them about whatever concerns you have, people in your study group, and so forth, people that are your moot court teammates or whatever. I don't know how feelings sort of being treated different, how that plays out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from my experience, and I can tell you for most of the BALSA, I've been at Duke since 2008, and ever since then I've been part of the BALSA organization. And like, I think that there is something that is almost transparent that happens that causes Black and brown people to realize you have to stay in your place, right? So if I'm a Black law student at Duke Law, and I've been admitted because I'm smart, my LSAT grades were good, I've got all this stuff going for me, but there's someone sitting next to me wondering why I'm here, like, how did you get here? So can I go to my white faculty member and say, when you were lecturing on this, I didn't understand this, without being perceived as being less? So not only in the class, but with the faculty, with the administration, with everything, like, how do I participate where I'm equal? So can I have a question that I don't understand and be considered, maybe I'm affirmative action or tokenism or whatever it is. And so with such small groups of kids, when I first came to Duke, we had 8 Black law students. And I think it vacillates between that and about 15 or so. They find that they have to have a
per class.
Yeah, they have to have a community among themselves, not that they fit in the whole larger construct. I remember having a conversation with Brian Wright one day, and he talked about why he always sat in the Blue Lounge.
Oh, he was so outgoing. Yeah,
right.
I never had him for class, but I got to know him just because he would sit there and we talk about music and whatever. Yeah.
But that was his point he was trying to make, was I'm here, and you're not going to dismiss me. And he sat in the same seat, and he didn't care who came around him, because he wanted them to know, I'm here because I belong here. I'm here because I'm smart. I'm here because I have something to contribute. But more times than not, they were struggling to find community to help them learn, to help them advance and get to the next level. And they found it only within themselves. They found it only, communicating with each other. Like, if one mastered this skill, they would get together in their little groups and they talk about it. They get together. They came over here a lot, with my family, and they talk, they be about 10 or 11 students in there. People used to say my house looks like United Nations, because all these different colored students in here, and they're in their own little space. My husband and I are, somewhere else, but you can hear some of the conversations they're talking about, the struggles that they're having, trying to succeed, in the school. And if you listen, Brian's talk is here, Jabrel's is here, Marnisha's is here. I think Melanie is coming up. But their stories are almost exactly the same. None of them tell a different story, like how they felt like they were supported at Duke Law. And then when you get to the LLMs, especially the Black and brown LLMs, it's a whole nother set of, it's even worse than what the JDs feel. So I don't know how that's fixed. I don't know if that exists in all predominantly white law schools. I do not know. But, in my almost 12, I think I'm at 12 years now, I have not heard a different story from a single Black student who has gone through that program. And the Latinx students, I haven't heard a very different experience, that they felt welcome and that they had support and, all that stuff. They were kind of like on their own in their own little island trying to survive. And to me, when you think about that, like, I am literally nobody at Duke Law. I don't even exist most of the time unless there's a problem. And yet I'm a resource for these kids because they know there's somebody who may have some bit of empathy for me and understand me a little bit and not judge me. And that has been my role since I've been there. And I mean, every class since 2008 have come here, eaten, spent time with each other, did whatever they needed to do. But they can't find that at the law school. Now, of course, they've got Black faculty, right? So they've got Trina and Guy and Jim and various people. And those people are welcoming, but how much can you tax them? You know, how much can you, they've got their own jobs. They've got their own things that they're trying to do. And so now you got 8 to 15 Black students per class. And you got 1, 2, and 3 Ls or however many. And these Black students are then, I can't overburden these people. So where do I go? And that's the struggle, I think, that most Black people feel no matter where they are, whether they're at work, at home, at the grocery store, all that things. Like, I've got to be careful because I may be arrested because they think I'm trying to steal something, or I may be shot because I'm, not, saying all the correct words or whatever. And so in society, being Black and brown has been historically hard. But now where we have so much technology that's driving this, right? So you can go to social media, you can tell, you can video, what all this stuff is driving it. It's just bringing to light what has been happening for centuries. So.
Well, just like my story about Judge McCree and being accused of having stolen the letter, right? You can't possibly be the person, right?
Right.
So, as you tell your story, I'm trying to connect it up to other similar experiences to see if there's something that tells us about what works. And you probably are aware that our first Chinese student, from mainland China, then became a huge success and a Duke trustee and all that. And because he was the only one here, he did get to know everyone. And my friend Wesley Jones, Mr. Jones, our Latin teacher, he had no choice, right, but to get to know all the white students and to get to know all the white faculty members, right? And by virtue of both of them being so excellent and outgoing, they created a tremendous set of lifelong, sort of friends and supporters and they mentored people and so forth. And they came in being hired. They actually knew that the employer had no idea who they were. Right. So there wasn't this sense that somebody would think that they were hired or selected. Now, I guess our Chinese student was selected out of the whole country as the one person, to be here as the Nixon scholar. So that, but they didn't, I think, come in with that same level of self-doubt and imagining it on the part of everyone else, right, about the selection. Now, they might have thought people will think someone like me can't be as good, right, or can't be as successful, but at least they knew that they'd sort of earned their place and that everybody else would think that. So I wonder how much, how you work on that side of it, the self-doubt and the perceptions about, do these people think I belong here? I mean, I do remember worrying if you were the first woman that was ever hired somewhere, would they ever hire another one if you didn't do a good job, right? And so forth. That said, I always felt, I've said that I know I was very fortunate. I did feel like the people around me wanted me to be successful. And I can't imagine that our students don't know that we want them all to be successful. I mean, why would we not want our students to be successful? That would be, what are we running the school for? That would be completely self-defeating. So we work really hard to get them jobs, and we, do all sorts of things to assist them in the classroom. So they must know in the back of their minds that we want that for them. So where is the disconnect? That's what I'm asking. Where is the disconnect? I try to talk to students, for example, about don't assume that it's a problem if your answer in class isn't the right answer. You know, that's part of the process, right, of figuring it out. And that doesn't mean that you're not successful. Don't assume I think one of my best lines is, if everything that happens in class is something that you already understood and that's what you figured out from the materials, then we're doing something wrong here, because we're charging you $60,000 and requiring you to come here. A lot is supposed to happen in class that you never imagined on your own, that you can't get at on your own. That is the point of it. That doesn't show that there's something wrong with how you prepared. You know, is it trying to explain to people that they shouldn't be worried and that they're paying the same amount of money as everybody else. So if they don't understand something, they should come in and ask about it, or they should raise their hand, right? That's what is it in your view, from talking to so many people, is it about messaging to students, at least in part, about how the system works and supporting them in their willingness to ask questions, to talk to faculty, to talk to fellow students. I mean, I remember talking to fellow students like, I don't understand this. Do you understand this? You know, whoever I was sitting next to. Right? I didn't look for another woman, right? Most of my study groups were mixed, men and women. I mean, you know, why would you just, right, the people that you sat with or whatever. And I just, you know, is there something, because of the background assumptions, that we need to be clearer on creating that comfort level, that sense that sometimes I say to students, if you don't tell me what you don't understand, I won't know, right? I mean, I'm presenting it in the way that I think is clear. If you don't understand it, now there are some students you can look at, and you can kind of see their faces. Mm-hmm. And I was told that I was one of those people, right? And the professor would look and they would say, oh yeah, I can tell if you don't understand that. You're just, and I don't know, I guess it must have been, you know, it's kind of slap-jawed, but it's a whole lot more effective if students will ask a question in class or come up after class and just, you know, ask a question. And that idea, you know, is it we tell them, you're paying for this, right? And the whole point of it is you should understand what just happened in class. You should feel comfortable about that. If you don't, let's talk about it. You know, what can we do? You know, you asked me the question, but I guess now I'm asking you the question, because you've heard so many of these stories and you've obviously, you know, thought about it. Do you have any suggestions on ways to break that cycle where people are feeling in a bad bubble? So Lawrence described the privilege bubble. They're feeling in a bubble. All these people out here, you know, they are doing what they're doing, and we're over here and we don't know. We don't really understand what's going on. We don't feel welcome. We don't feel, right? How do we dissolve that invisible negative bubble?
So I have several thoughts, but I'll tell you, if you get a chance, look at Jabril Reeves. He was a class of 2019. He tells the story of hanging out with his friends, and he encountered another white colleague, Duke Law student. And whether he was drinking or whatever, I don't know, but the white student threatened to kill Jabril and his other two black friends. They're out socializing, you know, having a good time, and one threatens to kill these three black students. And as I understand it, let me say one thing. So when the phone rang late at night, I didn't understand, because usually when your phone rings late at night, somebody's dead, right? So my phone rings late at night, and it's one of them. I don't know which one it was, but one of them, and they're telling me what's happened. And I could not even fathom what he was saying to me, because first of all, I've been asleep, but not only that someone threatened to kill him. There was one of his classmates. And so, you know, I have a lot of relationships. I have very good relationships with most of the black judges in the state of North Carolina. So the first person I thought of was Becton, because Becton taught at Duke Law. You know, he went early graduates from Duke Law. and Trina, because as I said to you earlier, I'm invisible and voiceless at Duke Law. So I have no power. It's not like I could pick up the phone and call the dean and say, hey, this is happening, or someone. I have no resource like that. So I gave them resources who could be an advocate for them. So there's that part where this thing happened and they did not feel like the university supported them. So the student who had threatened them, I guess, got a slap on the hand, and they were made to feel kind of like, okay, you don't matter. But I think, to answer your question, there's a paper, I think it was written in 2014, about the trauma of our genes, right? So like Black people being enslaved for so long, it's been this way for so long that it is inherent enough in us to not trust white people, and then to always think that they're suspicious of us regardless to how we approach them. Some people have broken down those barriers. I have people at Duke Law that are white, male and female, who are just adorable to me. They call me before they call Wayne. They middle of the night, they have a technical problem, they call me. And I've built those relationships. So I think the point that you made earlier about personal relationships is very important about that. But then I think it is a trust factor. So if I come into Professor Beale's office and she's told me about, some legislative, the Clinton 3 Strikes Act or whatever it is she's taught me, and I question her because I didn't get something about that, is she still going to see me as a smart, competent Black or brown student, or is she going to assume that I only got in because of tokenism or whatever it is, the reason why they're there? So there's that. And then I think the last part of it is like, where am I safest? And I think every person on the planet can answer that. Like when you go home and open your door, you feel safe in your home. You know that when you're in your home, there's less likely for anything to happen to you. Like if you get on the elevator and there are a bunch of Black and brown and white people in the elevator, you might have a little bit of tension. But when you go home, you're safe. For Black students, that safety is among themselves, among each other. And you could talk to any of them, even the current group. Like, I don't know where my resources are right now. I don't know where I can go, and there's a book that was written, I think it's been written at least 10, 12 years ago, so why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? It's because I feel safe at this space, because no one in this space is going to judge me. No one in this space is going to hurt me, because they're in the same place I am. They have the same struggle I have, like they have the same issues that I have. And so for our students, that's a part of what it is. There's probably other pieces I don't know. For example, if you take Brian went to Harvard. I mean, he is a brilliant young man. I mean, simply brilliant. Melanie Walker, same thing, brilliant. But they struggled at Duke Law, and I'm talking about like, before Justice Beasley became the Supreme Court justice, she would come over and she would talk to them. And, like through our interaction, she hired Melanie as her clerk, just brilliant examples of students who are competent, belong there, contribute, but they find themselves in a bubble that's not so accepting of them, so why is there so many? How come there's so few Black faculty? How come there's so few Black administrators, And so it's kind of like one of those things where am I safe? And for most of us, we are safe among ourselves versus being in the midst of people who have preconceived notions about who or what we are.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the analogy to women only goes so far, because there's never been that kind of residential and school segregation in the same way. Right. So when you went home, there were men in your home and women in your home. Now, a lot of historic domestic violence and so forth, so you can't ignore all that, but at least that wasn't everybody's day-to-day experience. So there was more of a natural integration, socially and so forth in that way, which probably means that people's safe space for many people, many women, for example, would have been at home, and it would have been men and women, brothers, fathers, whatever, there as well. Are you familiar with the idea of the imposter syndrome?
Absolutely.
So what you're describing sounds a lot like the imposter syndrome too, where you begin to doubt yourself, right? You don't feel safe. You wonder if you got here by mistake, right? Or whether other people think you got there by mistake. There's, I think, quite a lot of research that women experience the imposter syndrome a lot as they move along. And certainly, doubting whether you can really make it, and feeling like, everything that happened up to that point could have easily gone the other way, right? And that sort of thing. And I don't know whether that's part of what you're describing. When you talk about the trauma of our genes, which I wrote down.
I can send you the article if you want me to. I'll send you the article.
Okay, that'd be great. So how much of it is made worse by not only, I'm just so shocked by the idea that a white law student would threaten to kill fellow students. And that's just, honestly, if you hadn't told me about this and he hadn't, revealed it, I just heard that somebody said that, I would have not believed it. I mean, first of all, I can't imagine any law student saying they're going to kill anyone, right? Yeah. I've never known anyone who said they were going to kill anyone. And if they were going to kill someone, if I had to believe that a law student said they would kill someone, I would imagine something like coming in and finding your boyfriend or girlfriend having sex with someone else, right? Where you would have that intense emotional response to the situation involving something so highly personal. So I just, the situation you've described is, to put it mildly, no wonder they didn't feel safe, right? And probably the student misconduct discipline process, because it's confidential, was the student who made the threat having some kind of psychiatric problem, right? And therefore didn't get expelled, right? Because, because otherwise, why would such a person be permitted to continue in the community, right?
And that's what they asked. That's exactly what they asked. Now, I will say, from what I understand from the story, everybody was out drinking. So I don't know how intoxicated everybody was. I don't know what precipitated the threat. I don't know any of that. All I just know is, hey, something bad has happened to me, help. And that's where it is. And then, as I understand, as you just said, the process is confidential. But what they came away from that process with was thinking that no one cares about me, because, as I understand it, the student who made the threat was allowed to learn from home. He didn't come into the building to take exams, but they were still required to come into the building and take exams and do all that. But he could not be in the space when they were in the same space. One of the things that I think, I can't remember who raised, but one of them raised, why hasn't this been reported to the bar? Why isn't this something, far more?
How would they know whether it had been reported to the bar?
I think that, and Trina probably could tell you this better than I can, because at some point I just moved away from it, because all I just tried to do is make sure they had the right contacts. But I don't know what the end result is, but the way Jabril describes it, it's not very much that happened to that student. Nothing very, he was allowed to continue into school and graduate, I think, with them as they graduated, but maybe not in the same space. But I don't really know. Liz and probably Dean Abrams and Bill Hoy, probably they know more than I do, but that's what I know.
Well, it certainly raises eyebrows, to put it mildly.
Right.
Like I said, but the only thing I would say is the rules for reporting are quite stringent, but the confidentiality of what you report. So I believe it's quite possible it was reported, but they weren't told that it was reported.
Yeah, I don't know any of that.
But that doesn't help them feel safer, right? So how do you negotiate that, right?
I think the question you asked, imposter syndrome, I want to tell you a story. So when I first started working at Duke Law, most of the time around Thanksgiving, holidays and stuff, many of the Black and brown students would stay in law school. And this is when I first started. So I was, trying to prove myself. So I'd get there like before dark and I'd leave dark. So I was working like 9, 10, 11 hours a day. And so, we were getting closer to the holiday. And I think the first one was Thanksgiving. There were about 7 or 8 Black students that are in the law library. There are 2 or 3 LLMs from various parts of the world were still there. And I said, when are you guys going home? Like we got 2 days before Thanksgiving. I can't afford to go home. All right. Well, so I talked to my husband and we started doing Sunday dinners. So they came over for Thanksgiving and they ate Thanksgiving with us, those that wanted to come. And then we did Sunday dinners. We cooked dinner every Sunday. If you want to come, you come. And that relationship has kind of moved to Balsa and a little bit of Hulsa, so that they always knew that they could come here and get something to eat. And we were very close to law school, so they could come and get something to eat. If you listen to Judge Webster's story, he'll tell you of him coming and speaking to them, and other, Duke Law alums, who have come, Black Duke Law alum have come and spoke to them and kind of helped them, shepherd the way. And so one of the things that when this became so prevalent to me, I talked to Kyle Kavanaugh, who's one of my mentors, and I said, hey, I am hearing a lot of the prevalence of hungry students on campus. Can I investigate? And he was sort of, well, let me think about this for a minute. And then eventually he connected me to a doctor that does student health on the health system side. And so we put together this ragtag team of people who were not really nutritionists or any of this. We were just trying to figure out whether food insecurity existed at Duke. And so after a couple of years of discussions, we were talking, we finally got them to allow, Larry Mineta was the head of student affairs at the university, allowed us to do a survey. So we surveyed about 6,500 students, professional undergrads and graduate students. And some of the data that we got back, like I think we didn't get as much data as I would have liked to have gotten back, because I was the person who sent out the survey. And who is this? I've never heard of her. She's not anyone at the university, so why is this? But we got like 1,700 responses back. 75 students reported that they had eaten out of a trash can while at the university. For students who had gone to events only because there was food. It wasn't like they wanted to be there, but they only went because there was food. And there were all this kind of data that we got. It never left. I think I saw it, Cal saw it, and Larry Mineta saw it. I don't think maybe Dean Sue saw it, but I don't think very many people saw it. So it wasn't like it was made public or anything like that. And eventually Dr. Washington, who's in charge of the health system, and Cal formed Healthy Duke, and the work we had done had been absorbed. But one of the things that we found out was not only Black and brown people, but even white women were experiencing imposter syndrome, because where they came from, they were the smartest, best, brightest, and all of a sudden I'm in a collective of everybody smarter. So why am I here? So I think your point is really, really a good one, because when imposter syndrome happens, where do you go for a resource? And I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember when the noose was hung on campus a few years ago? And so President Broadhead and Sally Kornbluth and Valerie Ashby had a town hall meeting. And one Asian woman stood up and she was literally in tears. She says, why is there no one here that looks like me? Why is there no one where I can go and feel safe? I feel like I do not belong here. And she was an undergraduate student. It was such a powerful statement. Everybody in the room was moved. But Valerie said, you can come to my office anytime you want to. I will make time for you. And so those kinds of things that happen around the university, it's like that they don't really feel like they're big enough issues because there's such a small population of people, right? So how many Black faculty do we have? Like 7? 8? I don't know how many it is, but it's not very many. And so you can't.
And we hired 2 more this year for the.
Yeah, I heard Tim Lovelace.
Which is very exciting. These are terrific people that have visited and will add a lot to our community.
Yeah, I heard Tim Lovelace is coming back. He called me as soon as he got the offer and told me he was coming back. So
right. Yeah. And Gina Gale too. Did you get to meet her last year?
Yeah. I didn't get to meet her last year, but like I said, most of the time, the students are trying to be considerate, right? So if we took Sara Beale, like, I know you're busy. You've got all these things going on. You're writing, you're researching, you're working on legislation, you're teaching, you got all these things. And if I see you, I'm a student going to come to you and say, I really didn't understand that whole lecture. Can you, the first thing that's going to go through my mind as a Black person is I would never do that. I might ask Trina that, I might ask Guy that, I might ask Jim that, but because I don't want to feel like I'm, 1, imposing on your time, but 2, that you be valuing me, you be seeing me in a different light than you did before.
Yeah. Well, so the things that occur to me, and I'd be interested in your reaction, is being much more clear, maybe even saying that students are required to come to office hours or whatever so many times, so that instead of them feeling like they're taking advantage of me, this is something that's expected, that they should be doing, and also reinforcing the idea that It's not what you didn't understand the first time. It's what you don't understand by the end of the class. So if you got it right away, terrific. If you need some more back and forth on this, maybe I wasn't as clear as I could have been, it's your job, right, to come in and talk, or right, maybe your study group gets together and there are 4 issues, they got 2 of them, nobody understands the other 2, email me, come into office hours. This is your job, and it's my job to respond to those inquiries. Do you think being more explicit about that would be helpful?
Yes and no. I think the problem is what we as Black people, how we think we are seen by white people, you know, like, so I can tell you, I know almost all the faculty, all the governing faculty, all the tenured faculty, all the faculty, mostly all the adjuncts, not so much, but all the faculty at Duke Law. I can't tell you how many of them will walk by me and not even acknowledge that I'm there. Or if they have a technical problem, they'll call Wayne, knowing that all he's going to do is just send the email to me to figure out what's going on. You know, and I am a senior IT manager. I'm 3 steps below the dean or something like that. And I don't even feel like I belong. So if you can imagine, I've been there 12 years. So if you can imagine a student who's only going to be there for 3 years, what are the signals that they are learning as they come into the class? So you got blueprint and all those things that they do to bring them in. But then what signals are they picking up as they're going through that process? So it's very early.
So maybe again, addressing this directly, and it's very useful hearing your responses. Maybe saying, I want you to stop worrying about what I'm thinking about you when you come in and ask questions. That is counterproductive. What you need to worry about is whether you understand it by the end of the class and when you go out to practice, right? So I don't actually think I'm judging you. I'm judging you if you don't come in and by the end you don't know it, because now we've both failed, right? I have not taught you and you have not learned. And right, you need to get over yourself, right? You need to get over yourself and recognize that, you know, you have that the door is open and I'm expecting you to come in, right? And how about that?
I mean, I think that's a good idea, but we've got, what, 400 and some years of trust issues that we have to get over. We have 400 issues of being shot and killed for the simplest of things. So I'm supposed to now walk into this PWI, this elite PWI, and think that they're going to see me as I am. That's hard to overcome that part.
I hear you. And I think, it's useful not to get too carried away on my part by imagining this is any more than a very targeted solution to a small part of the problem. But I can't solve the whole thing, right? So to the extent that what we're talking about is what is the experience and perception of students. And I normally teach 1Ls. I have always viewed myself as somebody who can help create community, who wants to introduce students to one another and to thinking about the law. And if I need a different vocabulary and a somewhat different way of explaining it and thinking about it. So for a long time, I've been trying to figure out, for decades, how to get students to understand that for many things, there's not an answer, right? And for a while, one year I kept saying, okay, so there's these arguments and these arguments. Now, if I were a judge, this is how I would rule and why. And of course, what I meant to emphasize is different judges would have different things, but somebody's going to have to decide these issues. At the end of the class, they gave me a little gavel and they said, we know you really want to be a judge and we hope you will be. I thought, okay, that one didn't work. Right. So now I say, essentially, this is why you will get paid, right? Because there are all these arguments on both sides. And the more arguments you can see, the better you'll get paid and the more likely you'll get a job. If it was pretty easy to tell what the answer was. It'd be like doing a Google search. It'd take that long and you present it. It wouldn't be interesting and we wouldn't need any more people to do it, right? So you need to understand that the job here is understanding how to make all these arguments. Now, at the end of the day, somebody is going to make a choice. But as you know, the trial judge may make a choice, and then the party's appeal comes out the other way.
Right.
And the court might split 2-1 in the Court of Appeals, and they might take it up to the Supreme Court. It's not like there will, for many, many things, be a clear answer. But there are arguments, and there are pieces of information that go into the argument. So if you don't know what the relevant statutory language is, you're not going to make a very good argument, right? If you don't know that you could draw on this analogy, you haven't seen that point. That's not as good as if you know, so it's like Vishnu, you know, all those hands. You don't want a lawyer that's, so some people, I worked for a guy that said, oh, gee whiz, Beale, it's always with you on the one hand and on the other hand, just what's the answer? No, actually, you don't want somebody with just 2 hands. You want somebody with all those different hands. So I feel like in my teaching, especially with first years, part of it is explaining to them what it is we're trying to do here. So you're helping me understand a dynamic that I need to respond to more explicitly, I think, and have more policies that relate to that. And I don't imagine that I'm going to make them feel more safe when they go into a convenience store at night to pick something up, right? I mean, that's like way beyond my control, although we would all hopefully be working on those issues, right? But within the law school, how they understand their relationship to faculty. And again, I guess I would say at some point, well, suppose some faculty member doesn't really like to have office hours very much and just kind of wants to do their own work. I would say, yeah, but you're paying a salary. And if you don't understand it, go in there, right? Yep. You know, and make an appointment. Don't just pop in or send an email saying, I have this question, I'd like to make an appointment, unless it's easier for you to respond by email, right? And be an advocate for yourself to get what you want out of the law school. If some people aren't doing their jobs as well as they might, to be as helpful as they might, then just be a little more of an advocate for yourself. But I think we, the faculty as a whole, views ourselves as dedicated and good teachers, and we would not want to have this perception keeping people from coming in to have these exchanges, which would be helpful to them and helpful to us in understanding what students don't understand, or exchanges after class. That's a problem that we maybe couldn't solve completely, but we could get a lot closer, right? If we recognize that. Now, it's going to be weirder if more stuff is online.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the things that may help, and I can't speak for any of them, but I will just say, if you talk to Guy or talk to Trina or Jim or some of the other Black faculty who interact a lot with at least the BALSA students, and I'm sure they interact with others as well. You know, I remember talking to Guy about this when he came back from Harvard, and you know, it was just really, really interesting to understand where we fit in this institution called Duke. You know, where do we fit? You know, do you know Thavola Glemp?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. So Thavola said to me one day, she said, every time something goes wrong with a Black person, I need a Black person on the committee, they call me. It's like, because you don't have enough Black people there to help. So you're expecting me to help solve all of the crises that happen at the university. And so I think that in a lot of ways, it's going to take a while. I think what you're talking about is absolutely good. The problem is, it's like, how do I trust? So if I were to tell you about an experience I had at Duke, could I trust that it would be handled in a way that would result in it being positive for me? Or can I trust that, you know, it would cause me to get fired, or it would cause me to do something else, you know, because like trust for a lot of Black and brown people, trusting of white people has ended up in destruction of their lives, you know, putting their lives in the hands of somebody else. And if you take the indigenous people in the Americas, so Native Americans, they trusted, and they're now, you know, somewhere in a casino, somewhere out in some part of the world. You know, for Black people, we are 16, 19 to now, and we're still having conversations about reparations, where Chinese encampments, Japanese encampments, Holocaust, all have been reimbursed. And most of what exists in America in its early foundations were built on the backs of slaves. And we can't even have a conversation about reparation because we don't know where these people are. And, you know, I didn't do that. I didn't have any slaves. My ancestors might have, right? There's just so many conversations to be had that it's not simple to have. And I think that it's going to take time for people to think about these kinds of things, like to get to a place where there is dialogue. I think the point that you made very early on is really the real central point, personal relationships, to be able to have relationships with someone that, they come over your house, you go over their house, you got to have a drink, you go have coffee or whatever it is. And you know each other outside of the sterile environment where I can learn, I can trust you. I learned that you are my friend. You're not going to let anything happen to me. You're going to take care of me. And I don't mean friend as in, friend, but I mean that you're a safe person, if you will.
Right. Well, that's, I'll try to keep that broader message in mind. And I feel like I've learned a lot from talking to you, just trying to reimagine how I and potentially we talk to students to begin to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment. So thank you for sharing that with me and kind of giving me feedback on these issues.
Happy to.
And also thanks for all the tech help. Do you remember when I was at Georgetown? You must have spent about 10 hours on the phone.
Yes, I did.
And I have to tell you that I'm one of those people that sends everything to Wayne because I don't know who does what. And, people are specialized in different things. And I figure he's the node who figures. I actually have kind of learned that some of the classroom stuff I send direct to Deb Kinney.
Yep.
Right. But other than that, I'm not very discerning about.
And that's perfectly fine. He's in charge of IT for the law school, so he should be. I mean, I just think that some people know after all these years that eventually Wayne is going to route it to me if it's a technology issue. Now, if it's a classroom issue, it's going to go to Miguel's team. If it's a web issue, it's going to go to Mike's team, But normally what Wayne is like a traffic director, right? He's directing traffic all the time, so he's saying, Rochelle, somebody's having this problem, or Mike, somebody's, that kind of thing. And every once in a while, he likes to get involved in resolutions of problems. But what I was saying is so a lot of the faculty have come to learn that, eventually it's going to make it to me. So why go up there when I have to loop back around and get my answer done more rapidly? And that's not to be disrespectful to him at all. It's just, that's just,
Oh, no, I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
But that not everybody contacts you directly. And you're probably lucky that I don't. Every time I get an email that I'm not sure about, I send it to Wayne. I'm sure, but who's this from? I think he probably doesn't appreciate being my only stop.
No, I think he does. I think he enjoys his work. I think sometimes it's a bit stressful for him. Like yesterday, we had a letter go out to some of the faculty. I don't know who all it went, and it caused a complete panic. And Crystal hadn't seen it. Maggie hadn't seen it, but it came to the help desk and people were asking, is this legitimate? Is this really a real email? And so I reached out to Maggie and Crystal.
The one about the salaries? The one about the salaries? Yeah.
I reached out.
I got that too. Yeah.
I reached out to Maggie and Crystal and I copied Wayne and, Crystal hadn't seen it. And so she wrote to whoever her contact was, and she said what her response to me was she sent an email out to the faculty. We didn't see it, but what I told my team now, so if the faculty comes and says, or calls and says they have this question about this thing, Crystal has already addressed it and tell them to take it up with Crystal, because we had not been made privy to what the letter was, but the faculty was emailed that this thing happened, and we were just bombarded by the people writing us. Is this legitimate? Is this legitimate? We don't know. And of course, Wayne is on vacation this week. So, it's not like I have a lot of insight into the policies and practices of the university and the law school. So I usually get the end of it, so, and I'm happy to have the end of it. I don't mind doing whatever it is that I have to do. It's just, as when you were at Georgetown, I mean, whatever it takes to solve the problem, we're going to do, it's just like,
God, you did.
It's just like what you said
about, they had no clue. They had no clue. Well, thank you very much for that and for this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I hope your daughter is okay. I think it must be time for you to check on her again, right?
I just sent my husband. We are, I'll send you a copy of this so you can look at it and see if you want us to upload it or not. And if not, you'll just have a copy that you can just keep for yourself.
Okay. And let me know how your daughter does.
Oh, I certainly will. I absolutely will. She'll be fine. She's, she had a colonoscopy. That's what it was. And so I guess she's having the residuals of that. So I think
that's such an unpleasant process too.
Oh my God. That sure is. Yeah.
Well, you take care.
You too. And have a great holiday.
You too. Bye.
Bye.